Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled, The Challenges and Considerations for Building Your Own UDI Solution, Hard Lessons. My name is Sumaya, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes with time for a question and answer session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and your comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screens. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please also note that this event will be recorded and made available for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Reed Tech, who helped develop the content for this presentation. For medical device manufacturers, Reed Tech provides UDI-specific solutions, services, and expertise, reducing the internal burden in navigating the required business rules for validating, managing, and submitting to regulatory agencies. Their customers are located throughout the world and include a wide range of medical device and pharmaceutical manufacturers. Also, the U.S. government, numerous patent authorities, IP-driven companies, and law firms. The corporate culture is driven by commitment to excellence, innovation, and a strong dedication to their customers, employees, and communities. Reed Tech is a LexisNexis company. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Our first speaker is Gary Sainer. Gary Sainer is the Senior Manager of Information Solutions in the Reed Tech Life Sciences Group. Is a subject matter expert on medical device unique device identification and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He serves as co-chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the Medical Devices Group. Our second speaker is Ray Voeller. Ray Voeller oversees the day-to-day operations for the Reed Tech's software development organization. He has an extensive background in creating high-performing teams that strengthen business and facilitate company growth, turning ideas into working solutions, turning ideas into working solutions. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic to our first presenter. So Gary, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you very much, Samara, for the introduction. And let me do a couple logistics things here to get the screen underway. Do you see my screen now?
Yep, it looks perfect.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone to the webinar today. We're going to have some discussion on the challenges and considerations for building your own UDI solution and talk about some of the hard lessons that we have encountered here at Reed Tech in building a UDI solution. So we'll be glad to share some of those things for you. You in the audience may have submitted some FDA device records to the Good ID database and are looking back at that experience and perhaps seeing that you have a lot of Class 1s to submit. And you're looking around the globe and see a lot of activity for other type of submissions in the future. And you may just be looking to do a fresh update on your approach, and that's what we would like to discuss with you today. On the other hand, there may be some in the audience that have only used manual data entry for the small number of records that they have and are now looking again at the avalanche of data that needs to be submitted globally and are looking at various solutions. Whatever your scenario, we'll be glad to share some information with you today. We'll divide the discussion into three different areas. First, I'll go through some of the landscape, the trends, the requirements that are out there, and as part of all good software activities, you want to gather the specs and the requirements up front. We'll do a quick review of that. what the global UDI requirements are. And then secondly, we'll dive into the data management needs and the particular options and approaches that are available, and consider some of the advantages, the disadvantages, and at that point, Ray will engage with me, and we'll talk about some of the experiences and knowledge that we've had over the course of time. And then thirdly, again, with Ray being available, we're going to make good use of his time. We're going to have Ray review some of the data management lessons that we have encountered in putting together a number of systems, some of those dedicated for UDI in particular, and do some Q&A at the end. So with that, let's do a quick tour around the world, starting off with US back in 2014, and with the European Union moving forward with their medical device regulation and in vitro diagnostic regulation. That looks like some dates are starting to roll in 2020, and we'll take a look at that. But in addition to those two, the Netherlands has a national implant registry underway, and there are some deadlines for that. There's another tier of regulatory bodies that have some specs that have been published. Saudi Arabia actually recently, about 2 weeks or so ago, updated their specification to be a final spec. So it looks like they're moving forward. And then the list just grows and grows. So we won't go through reading each one of those particular areas, but it does look like a map across the world that is just dotted with the various countries that are considering UDI. If you market product in that particular country that has an X on it, be aware that UDI is in your near future. Many regulatory bodies, and there's some not on the list here as well, they will already have plans or will be soon making plans to adopt UDI. Now, in parallel to the regulatory requirements, there is a activity that is taking place in the commercial industry, where the trading partners that you actually sell product to are asking that the information about the products be submitted electronically, and more so in a structured format. We see GS1, Global Data Synchronization Network, being used and pointed to very frequently. If you sell products by way of a group purchasing organization, or their membership has pulled their volumes together and have some buying power, perhaps you're encountering some of the group purchasing organizations that are asking for more structured product information. In addition to GPOs, there's a number of distributors, retailers, Amazon, Walmart, so on, that are moving forward with collecting data, and obviously the healthcare prescribers and providers that use medical devices and would like information to be in a structured fashion. I'll call out the National Health Service of England. They're on the leading edge and moving forward with collecting product information, and we'll see some timelines for the National Health Service of England. And this is around the world, so this is not a national US type of activity. It's global, and for those companies that do market products worldwide, this is going to be an ever-increasing topic on your agenda. I did want to carve out a small segment of customers that have banded together. There's, I think, 6 and perhaps some more, large healthcare networks, and the Healthcare Transformation Group, if you had perhaps heard of that name. This is a group of 6 and perhaps growing large healthcare networks, and we have seen some activity on these particular organizations where they prefer and now are starting to require through contract negotiation and changing clauses to receive product information with identification of GS1 standards, and then receiving that information through a conduit of the GDSN. So that is taking place. And then I would say in the last year, 18 months, there is a growing interest in some of the downstream data consumers and product users. This is highly promoted by FDA to have the UDI information now that class 2s and 3s have data available in the Daily Med, the Access Good ID. Having that data starting to embed into the various use cases throughout the industry. So the payers, the reimbursements, insurance, track and trace activities, and other registries, safety interests. There's a number of groups that are working through various protocols and different pilots to use UDI, and this is going to be a third wave. So if you map those various entities that we were just describing and take a look at how your UDI information is broadcast, you might think that the UDI data record only goes to a registration database and perhaps to maybe one or two of your customers. But that information then has many downstream users. So it will show up in electronic health records, down to the hospitals and the pharmacies and so on. And given a year, I think it's a little bit slow, but I think over time there will be higher adoption in some of the registries and other types of activities around the world. So this is not, again, a national activity. As to the timing, I collected some of the upcoming events in roughly the next 3 years. We won't go into all these particular activities, but later this year in September, the National Health Service of England has their Class 1 device information due. And then I'll also call out the May 2020 event, less than a year away now, believe it or not. The date of application is May 26, 2020 for the European Union Medical Device Regulation. So that is certainly going to change the way that devices are registered and now collect UDI information and have UDI placed on the products. And 2020 is going to be a very busy year. Later that same year, next year, in September, the US FDA has their compliance date for the Class 1 products. So there's a lot of deadlines in the near future that need to be considered. If we just try to step back and summarize some of the topics that we've touched on, we do see more regulatory requirements coming about. We do see a lot more commercial requirements from your actual customers, and there's a growing wave now interest in the downstream requirements. We did talk about, but we are seeing here at RETEC a lot of complex data sets. They are not using one common data set for all these different applications that we just talked about. They vary and have many times unique particular data fields in the data record. And there's not much commonality as you start to get down to the very minutiae evaluation of each of these particular data records. Yes, there's certainly some common fields, and we leverage those as we're able to, but we do not expect a high level of harmonization as you go around the world with all these different data sets. And surprise, surprise, each particular regulatory body and other type of agency has most likely going to be building their own type of submission method in their package, and have their own type of schema for recording information. So we do see a lot of changes in the near future, and in some cases the reaction time could be very short to actually have a solution put together. All of these are more reasons to evaluate your UDI master data management approach, and we'll try to provide some information in the conversation today. So Maya, I think this is a good time for poll question number 1 and 2. Are we able to do that?
Yep, perfect. So we can go ahead and get that started. Thank you, Gary. So audience members, you should be seeing your first poll question on your screens. And that question is, in what countries do you market your medical devices? And please select all that applies. So you can select more than one option here. And your options are USA, EU, Australia, Saudi Arabia, or South Korea and South Korea. Okay, I'll just give you guys a couple more seconds to answer that poll question. And again, your options are USA, EU, Australia, Saudi Arabia, or South Korea. Okay, it looks like the majority of audience members have voted, so I'll close the poll and share the results. So the results are, with 94% of the votes went to EU, and then USA 88%. So that was a lot of audience members selected both of those options. And Australia with 63%, Saudi Arabia with 55%, and then South Korea with 57%. Right? So that does also bring us to our second poll question. And that question should be popping over your screens right now. And that question is, which best describes your preparation for EU UDI data submission to EUDMED? And your options are not started, need help, using internal staff to gather data submission information and specs, contracted external assistance for data submission and specs, or have a plan and started preparing data submission solution. So you can just select one here, right? I do see that audience members are voting in right now, so I'll just go over the options once more. So the options are not started, need help, use internal staff to gather data submission information and specs, contracted external assistance for data submission and specs, or have a plan and start preparing data submission solution. So it does look like our audience members have voted in, so I'll close the poll and launch those results. Should be seeing them on your screen. So it looks like the majority of audience members voted using internal staff to gather data submission info and specs with 41% of the votes, followed by, there was actually a tie here, so that was not started, 22%, and then 22% also went to have a plan and start preparing data submission solution, followed by contracted external assistance for data submission and specs at 11%, and the final, with the least percentage of votes, need help with 4%. So Gary, I'm just gonna give that back to you.
Thank you, Samaya. We're going to move on. Very interesting specs. Thank you for participating in that poll. So the next session, we'll dive into some of the data management relative to UDI. And on the screen, you'll see a number of basic functions, and these are more or less universal. As you start to consider building a particular solution or buying a solution, you want to make sure these particular functions are covered. Compliant governance, importing data, doing data validation and normalization, having a workflow for various approvals, making sure the record versions are stored. In many cases, there are 20 Part 11 compliance issues, certainly in the US, Annex 11 in Europe. Making sure you have a version audit trail, and then making sure there's reporting that allows you to have a good visual review of what is the various status of the data, where it is, what needs to be done, what needs your attention. And we have seen that a number of systems are not all-encompassing, do everything, single type of an application. many applications need to communicate one with another. And being able to synchronize the data and the status is very important. And again, that's very customized to your particular scenario, but keep that in mind. And then doing the data exports and communication out to the target channels. I'm just going to hit some of the high points here. We have seen over the course of time that for good UDI data management, here's some practices and additional things that you might want to keep in mind. Having a trusted source of the information. Typically, that is in a central repository. Certainly, there's many advantages in having it centralized, so that you know where to go and that the control of the actual data is there, and that it's able to be incrementally added and to accommodate different connectors. So as different entities come on board, and we saw the list in previous slides, you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time or recreate the connection, but you want to be able to use the same underlying platform and then build appropriate connectors as necessary, and be flexible with your investment. I will add one other quick comment. You also have internal customers. There are numerous departments and disciplines in your corporation that touch in some particular fashion the UDI data. And going from left to right there's many different departments, from design to manufacturing, operations, regulatory, quality, and sales and marketing, identifying products and so on. This is a very broad topic. We won't spend much more time on that, but be aware that you have internal customers. You want to have data available and share it with these individual departments. Having it sit in an isolated vault somewhere protects the data, but usability is very, very low. So you want access for each of these various disciplines. And then I want to go over 3 different approaches that you might have thought about or considered when you're starting to plan a solution. As of today, you might have what I refer to as local systems, and these are point solutions, and they appear to naturally evolve and grow as a new market arises. Local affiliate would be able to gather information and meet the regulatory requirements. And it's really just kind of a point solution without much or any corporate control, uniformity, or sharing of the data. Another model is a central model, and we have talked to a number of clients that have made use of this model, where the various local information is pulled together and show a funnel there, but it's really like a vacuum where the data is sucked into a corporate system database. And from that point, many times corporate staff take over. They process the data, make sure it's correct, they approve it, and do all the storage, and they're responsible for dissemination and submission to each of the local authorities. And that's one model that actually works there, but this is has a symptom that it's very heavily controlled in a corporate setting. The last particular approach that we'll talk about, I refer to as a distributed system. In this particular case, affiliates, again, are involved. They submit data into a corporate system, but the system in this particular scenario is flexible, and it does have various rules and various workflow assignments. For example, maybe there's some data entry and approvals, but the actual high level or secondary submission and approval is done by a corporate person, and then local submissions are handed back to the affiliates. So this is a little bit more like the spokes of a wheel, where each particular geographic area has involvement. They know timing requirements, they're familiar with the terminology and so on, and they take care of making sure the products are current and approved in the local area. But all the data is stored in a common infrastructure, sharing business roles and data and so on. So this is another model that you might want to pursue as you look at some of the various solutions that you're considering. So Maya, let's knock out polls 3 and 4 at this point, and then we'll have one left.
Great, thank you so much, Gary. So audience members, you should be seeing poll question number 3 on your screens right now. So that question is, what is your current process for regional regulatory submissions? And your options are local systems, multiple isolated systems, central corporate system, work performed by corporate staff, distributed corporate system, other, or not applicable. Right, and your options again are local systems, multiple isolated systems, central corporate system, work performed by corporate staff, distributed corporate system, other, or not applicable. Okay, and it seems like our audience members, majority of them have just voted, so I'll close the poll and launch the results. So the results are with 34% of the votes went to central corporate system, followed by 29% of the votes went to local systems, and then that was 22% at distributed corporate system, then 7% each for other or not applicable, right? And I'll just launch the 4th poll right here, right? You should be seeing that on your screens, and that question is, what is your desired process for regional UDI data submissions? So that is, your options are local systems, multiple isolated systems, central corporate system performed by corporate staff, distributed corporate system shared by local corporate users, other or not applicable. Again, those options are local systems, central corporate system performed by corporate staff, distributed corporate system shared by local and corporate users, other or not applicable. Right. Seems like the majority of our audience members have voted, so I'll close that poll right now and launch the results. Okay, and the results are 43% of the votes went to distributed corporate system shared by local and corporate users, and then followed by 25% of the votes went to central corporate system performed by corporate staff, then 13% of votes went to local systems, followed by, there was a tie again at other and not applicable at 10%. Right, so I'll give the presentation back to Gary.
Thank you, Samaya. We're going to move on to some various data submission methods and start to engage with Ray here at some comments about each of these particular scenarios. So the tasks that manufacturers have, you'll find yourself on the left-hand side of this screen, needing to move data from your internal repository over to a health authority, and it could be the FDA, or very soon it's going to be UDI. It might be the any other of these regulatory bodies that come on board. And you have a various set, and there's 4 that we have identified here. First being a manual entry. This would make use of a web interface that is sponsored and hosted by the health authority. Second is a build, where you build an internal solution, submit data. You can also buy a commercially available solution from a vendor and install it, or you can rent. And by rent, what we mean by that is you're giving login credentials to a externally hosted piece of software as a service comes into play here, so SaaS, where you operate and perform your work in that particular application, and then all data is then submitted to the health authority. So we're going to take a deep dive into each of these 4 different types of approaches. First being manual entry. And again, this is where you have internal staff, or you can actually contract a third-party service to do this work on your behalf. Create an account, do the login, and then submit data. Typically, this is a single record at a time where the data value is typed in, and does not lend itself, obviously, then to real high volumes. Ray, there's a couple green arrows that you highlighted on this slide. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of these things? We're not going to hit every item, but we want to touch on some of the important ones here.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So just based on some of my experience, Gary, I wanted to highlight a couple of things with manual data entry that I'm sure most people are aware of. You know, one of the biggest challenges is data quality with miskeys. So as you're entering data directly into a health authority, we're not necessarily privy to the data edits and quality that's tied into there. So we have seen issues where things have been miskeyed from time to time. One of the bigger things we tend to see is that the volumes change. So while this is a good solution for a very low number of transactions, a lot of times there are acquisitions within a company, and so their volume grows, and so at that point they need to look for a solution. The other thing to keep in mind with something like a manual approach is as we expand UDI globally, there are going to be many health authorities that companies are probably going to have to enter data into. So it's not a one and done. It'll be in multiple health authorities that you have to enter the data, which just leads to additional work on the internal staff.
Well, thanks for those comments. Really good. We've also seen that some of our clients engage us with a tool or product that we offer, and it's not because they have a few fields and the work could actually be done. What they value is being able to have access to the subject matter expertise and basically a quick responsive help desk. So that comes into play where we have seen the FDA get bogged down at very high and busy times, and so getting a direction and some answers can delay your progress. We've also seen, and I don't know if this is going to be an indication of things to come, but the European Commission has a website with a lot of good information, but we have not seen an interactive type of a help desk that the FDA put together. So maybe that will come, but being able to get answers in this manual data mode can be a problem, and for that reason, connecting up with perhaps some of the other options might be a better scenario. Did you also want to talk about the last bullet down there, where if you make entry into the FDA, we know that it's not going to be shared with the European Union UDI, so in that case, you have to do it over again, don't you?
You're going to have, as I had mentioned briefly, that there are multiple places you may need to send this data, right? So you're going to be entering the data over and over again, heavy use of, a spreadsheet or just manual entry.
Okay, very good. Let's move on to the next one then, Ray. The next one, buy, purchase, and install. So this, again, would be a scenario where you evaluate what's available in the marketplace and look for a piece of software, and then go through the procurement exercise. So that does take some rigor to, first of all, do the evaluation, go through the contract negotiations and so on, and find the best fit for what you're trying to accomplish, and then install that inside your firewall and doing the internal training and startup and validation and so on. And again, Ray, I see a number of green arrows here on this one. Let's talk about some of those.
Sure. So buy is an interesting one. When you look at where the technology industry has evolved over the years, buy used to be the way to go. Today, things are evolving more towards a rental type thing with the technology that's made available. The reason for that, as you had mentioned about, you may need to install something on your internal infrastructure. So there are additional costs to just the software. You have your infrastructure, which you have to purchase. You need to maintain that infrastructure. If you buy a solution, you're probably going to have to customize it. So that's going to add cost. You're going to have to put your own resources on it and customize it into your workflow. And let's not forget those ongoing maintenance costs, right? 15 to 20% typically year over year. Also, the other thing I would mention to you is buying a solution like this is you have to ensure that your vendor is validation ready for the areas that you're going to go into, right? So, well, you may be 21 CFR Part 11 ready for the US, are you Annex 11 ready for EU MDR and other industries? Consider code updates. You know, are they code updates going to be timely from the vendor? When you get those, you're going to have to install them. How complex is that going to be when you've already customized your workflow and some of that product? So things to keep in mind as you look to a purchase.
Very good. And I see at the bottom there that you're really dependent on the vendor's timing and delivery of upgrades to accommodate new channels. So a new health authority, let's say Saudi Arabia comes on, you know, you're really at their mercy of when that code would be available, right?
Right, and keep in mind too that it doesn't take the work away from you, you still have to test, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot of work around testing, and you may be able to automate that, but you may be stuck with a lot of manual testing also. Okay,
very good. Let's move on to the next one then, which is rent. You alluded to this one earlier. More commonly known as software as a service. In this model, you have login credentials, and you basically subscribe to an external, typically online vendor system. They do hosting and do the upgrades, so you share a version of software with many tenants. That brings into the play the description there of a low cost, in that in this particular model, you might be sharing the burden of developing that cost across many of the tenants and customers that are using that. So this has some leverage in that particular regard, and it does not have any impact on your infrastructure. So your local infrastructure, you're not going through the hardware and maintenance and so on. And typically this is a connection with simply an internet browser. You have two additional items there, Ray. What are those?
Sure. So, you know, SaaS is, in my opinion, in my experience, is the way to go overall in building applications today. You know, the vendor maintains the app. They're responsible for getting the updates in on time. You have scalability already built in. Typically, these are going to exist in the cloud today, or you know, a private cloud, if not one of the public clouds, which makes it easy for access. Also allows no hardware cost to the user. And the big thing is easy setup, right? So you work with your vendor, you know, work out your contract arrangements, you do some testing and some validation, evaluate your product, and you're up and running. So it becomes more focused on the business and the business users as opposed to the technology. As you know, when you're going to purchase a technology, you still got to get that through your IT group and make sure that that infrastructure or piece of software that will work within your infrastructure and is improved in that environment. A SaaS application takes all that away for you.
Right. Yep. Well, I do see a growing interest in a lot more software applications are moving to this particular model. The last model that we'll cover is the build model, and this is a model where in-house development takes place. So you spec out and design, build, and then you know you own that piece of software, so you maintain it over the course of time. And again, you have some highlighted items here. Let's talk about those.
So build is one we know well, right? Because that's what we did for our US UDI solution. So we have a lot of experience there, and we've worked through some of the pain. Things that we've seen in doing this approach is, you know, cost, you know, internal resources, ongoing maintenance, infrastructure, all that adds up, you know, time over time. Another key factor is you have to make sure you have internal business expertise. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but there is no way we could have gotten to where we are with US UDI if we had not had the SMEs on the business side to help drive us through, and the technical people who understood the business and the business process. So that becomes really important. New channels and countries are going to be coming on board, right? You've laid out some of the timeline. That's only part of it. There's a lot more that's going to be happening. The challenges it puts on you as a company internally is resource prioritization. Pulling your resources off to do other things because something hot is hitting and you need to use them, that's going to impact your delivery time and your development. You need to coordinate with the receiving authorities, and you're going to have to test, and test. The timeline, you look at some of the dates that we have thrown out there. You look at what we've done in the past. It's taken a year or so. We continue to evolve based on FDA specs. And remember, you're taking on requirements, development, test, validation, all key components in making your build successful. Can it be done? Absolutely. We've done it. Other companies have done it. This company has to decide if they want to make that commitment with the initial cost and the ongoing maintenance costs.
Yeah, it really does sound like a significant amount of internal resources to accomplish this, and then keep it up and running, because you are the owner of it at that point.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think what we'll do, looking at the time, is move into some of the lessons that we have learned. Let me first of all talk about and introduce a product, a single source for medical device product. It's a third generation product that we're currently working on. Previous generations had dedicated and very high volume, probably 450,000 records submitted to the FDA Good ID. So that's a well-oiled, well-crafted machine, and thank you, Ray, for putting that into place. We've used it extensively, and it's able to accommodate the Class 1. And then there's another product that was dedicated for the connection to the Global Data Synchronization Network. Single source has these three bulleted functions there: import data, doing the workflows and approvals and so on, and exporting data, some of the things that we talked about earlier. The beauty of single source for medical devices, though, is that the downstream connections to various regulatory bodies will be able to be incrementally added. So you're basically reusing your data and, where possible, the same data fields. But this would be a central repository, not just for one national regulatory body, but global, around the world. So we highlighted a number there. The European Union will be the first up and running, and then migration of the FDA, and then literally around the world. And then this very same platform has the connection to a GDSN data pool, where we're able to make connections there, and then obviously transfer data out to a downstream trading partner. So very powerful, very flexible, and what we believe is a good particular platform. Now, Ray, this was an online data or system hosted here in our data center?
That's correct. Yes.
Yep.
We built this as a SaaS solution. We best thought that was the solution that our customers would want and need, and it seems to have worked out well for us.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about the implementations that we've seen. One model is to have the single source function as the master data repository. So in this particular scenario, the data hub is standalone. Data comes from manufacturer into the single source, and then to downstream parties. Using the very same technology, some of the other type of customers have source data, and they have master data management systems locally installed. They want to retain that and keep their master source there. In that particular scenario, there's tight integration for two-way communication from their system to single source. And in that particular model, the single source simply acts as a connector and means, conduit means to transfer data to the downstream party, taking care of all those nuances and building the appropriate packages and data fields as necessary for a particular channel, such as UDI. And then using similar data, picking off custom fields as necessary and dedicated fields, I should say, for Saudi Arabia data record and submission there. So it is able to accommodate different scenarios, and we won't go into the details, but the flexible in that it could be completely automated and configured so that data flows through once it meets all the internal validation and is submitted automatically, received, processed, and submitted all without a touch of a particular user. So there's a lot of flexibility and options there. Ray, could you highlight some of the lessons that we've had in the last few minutes here?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to get through this quickly so that we have time for questions. But obviously, I think we're really well positioned for moving to global UDI based on our experience with the U.S. UDI process. The interesting thing is we still have the same business and technology team together that we're evolving onto that and building on our platform and infrastructure. So things that we did learn, I will tell you, so we were a little over a year for our development of US UDI. I think during that time I aged 10 years. It was real challenging in trying to deal with spec changes and things like that, and the team worked really, really hard to get us there. So lead time for development is minimally a year. So if you haven't started, you're probably behind right now, and so it's going to take a little more effort to kind of move along. Resources, again, I highlighted that our team is still together, both the business and the technology team. It's been a tremendous asset as we've already started building our global solution. But having that expertise and having everyone understand the business processes has been really important. But we had to learn that early on, so that was painful to start out with. Deadlines, they typically don't move, right? We're used to that on the technology side. We actually, in our US UDI solution, we partnered with a local consulting firm who had life sciences development experience and our team in order to meet the timeline. So that was at a cost to us initially to get off the ground, but we felt it was a great investment at that time. We had considered offshore, but there are challenges with that because of the changing specs. Typically, your offshore solution will get very expensive if you're changing requirements on a regular basis. And as we've all seen, requirements were changing for the FDA with the US solution, and will continue to evolve for the global solution, which leads us into ongoing spec changes and user enhancements. So subject matter expertise was key for us. Plan for an early start. Get yourself going, do your discovery, your due diligence. Really important to do that stuff up front. Our business today is spending a lot of time with various key contributors to help us understand, as we evolve and put this together. Establish your knowledge owner of the undertaking. Again, I can't stress enough that this knowledge and experience has been an absolute key for us in being able to pull this together. The FDA. So our relationship with the FDA really helped us. We were able to understand kind of their needs as that was evolving. It was through that we realized that they couldn't handle the volume of data we were going to be sending them. And so early on, we were able to identify that we had to build throttling into our application so that we could send them the number of records that they could handle as they continue to evolve. So again, involvement as an early tester with the FDA was absolutely key. I'll also tell you that being an agile development shop had helped us with that because we were able to build test automation as we were working with the FDA, and that saved us some time. Dedicated resources. We all know you got to have focus, right? There's a lot of work to be done. Things are changing, so you want to be able to have your resources dedicated and focused on the work that you're doing. We had a dedicated computer systems validation person on staff. Again, an investment that was a key contributor for us. She was able to help us, get through that process, make sure that we were 21 CFR Part 11 for our U.S. UDI solution, and also we're able to automate our validation process. So we took what was a manual process that took about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on what happened, down to less than a week, but with automation, which allows us to deliver quicker. A couple of takeaways for people to think about: understand the content and subject matter expertise, which we've talked about a bit. The specs are going to be different for every channel, and Gary, you alluded to that about things changing. There's no cookie cutter here. So we're building our solution, and I would recommend that people build their solution with that flexibility, which is really hard to do out of the gate. But based on what we've done, I think we have a really good solution to be able to respond to new channels very quickly. Scalability, flexibility, and tracking multiple regions. Absolutely key, the flexibility, scalability, some of the volumes that we're starting to hear. If these things evolve into things like track and trace, as you had mentioned earlier, it's going to be absolutely huge. So we're positioning ourselves now to be able to deal with that from a data structure and workflow perspective. So I feel that that's puts us in a good shape. Simplifying the process for the user interface. Gary, I think the best compliment I ever received from a customer on US UDI was, we don't need the training. The user interface was so intuitive and fit with the business process that they were able to do it on their own. And we have some really strong UX UI people who have really helped us with that and are working on our new solution. Keep in mind, you're going to be in different time zones, in different languages, right? You're going to have to consider that with your build. We had some of the time zone considerations with our US solution. It gets even bigger when you go to a global solution, as we all know. And rework. We had a lot of rework through our US UDI solution as specs were evolving. No fault of anyone. It was just something that was being developed, that people were learning things. We actually, working with some of our customers, were able to identify some challenges that we took back to the FDA, and they made some spec changes based on that. But we just received a change in the FDA spec for US UDI the other day, and it's got to be turned around very quickly. So we're positioned to do that. But these things kind of pop up from time to time. So I hope that helps.
That was invaluable. I wish we had, access to that type of information, like, 2014.
Sorry, I ran through that so quickly.
No, that was a lot of really good points, and you can go back to the slide presentation and review it a little bit more detail later on. Thank you very much, Ray. That was invaluable in sharing some of the things that you just don't know what's going to be around the corner until you make the turn. And then, you experience these things and yet you learn from them, and now we're a little more experienced going forward, and we're glad to share that experience with you folks.
I feel a lot better now than I did 4 years ago.
Right. So Maya, are we able to do one last poll question? And then I think we're nearing the end of our time here. We'll probably be able to take a couple of questions, but let's do the poll question very quickly.
Yep, so our final poll question, you should be seeing that on your screens, audience members, and that question is, what is your current preference for a UDI data submission method to UDMed? And your options are manual entry, enter data into the EU web interface, or develop an internal UDMed submission solution, or buy, purchase, and install vendor UDMed submission application, or rent, subscribe to a hosted vendor UDMed solution, SaaS, or other. Okay, and our audience members are still voting in, so I'll just go ahead and repeat your options for you. And that is manual entry, so enter data into EU web interface, or develop an internal UDMed submission solution, or buy, purchase, and install vendor UDMed submission application, or rent, subscribe to a hosted vendor UDMed solution, SaaS, or other. So it looks like the majority of our audience members have voted. So I'll close the poll and launch the results. Should be seeing that on your screens. And rent which 39% of the votes was what majority of our audience members voted. So that was rent, subscribe to a hosted vendor, a UDMed solution, followed by manual entry at 22%. So that was manual entry, enter data into EU web interface, followed by build, develop an internal UDMed submission solution at 17%. After that, that was other at 14%, and the last one was buy at 8%. So I'll close that poll right now, and we'll launch into our poll, question and answer session. So audience members, you can continue sending in your questions for us. I did receive some questions already, so I'll start off with that. And our first question is it likely that the EU UDI deadline will be delayed? So Gary and Ray, you can just go ahead and answer that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Samai. The actual dates are firmly in black and white in the legislation. I don't think those dates are changing, but there is accommodation for the scenario where UDMed might be delayed and not ready. So there is an actual provision in how the European Council would react to that, and basically they need to put out a notice saying that UDMed is ready. If it's not, it'll be delayed, and then there's a 6-month reaction time after that. There have been some references to the vigilance and in the post-marketing modules, perhaps delayed, not ready for May 2020. But from the European Commission, they were indicating that the other modules, in particular the device UDI module and the economic operator modules, would be ready on time. Now, you may have heard some news recently. There's certainly some chatter and some concern at member states regarding the number of notified bodies. As of today, there's only 2 notified bodies, and there were roughly 50 plus that were certified to do the medical device directive approvals. So that is way down, and there's industry and also member states concerned that there's not enough notified bodies to meet the deadline. So we will see if there's anything official, but as of now, the European Commission has not announced a delay. So maybe next question.
Great, thank you so much, Gary. Our next question is, the EU UDI system uses basic UDI-DI. This number is used to identify the medical devices on EC certificates, but is not put in medical devices or packages. The question is, can GS1 companies basic UDI-DI numbers together with UDI-DI numbers? Is it structured like parent-daughter numbers between basic UDI-DI and UDI-DI? So
GS1, just about 2 weeks ago, updated their definition of their term, global model number, for the European Union basic UDI-DI. So you might want to get a quick read of that. And they define how the basic UDI-DI is created. It includes the company prefix and then a model reference, and that those 2 components add up to 23 characters, and then the last 2 characters are generated by a check digit algorithm for a total of 25 characters. The organization of that is such that is to be a family identifier. It's not on the printed label in any fashion, but it's a grouping identifier for a family. If you have a particular group of products and they share similar intent and specifications and so on, then you would make the individual device identifiers for the devices children of that family basic UDI-DI. If there's further questions, certainly send them in and we'll address them.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary and Ray. Yes, we did have a couple more questions, but since we've reached the end of the webinar, we will reach out back to you guys with those questions. And again, thank you so much, audience members, for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. I also just want to show you the slide where you can send further questions to the ReadTech team. Should be seeing that on your screens right now. So you can quickly take a note of that contact information as well. Right, and a survey window will be popping up on your screens. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us improve our webinars. You can share this webinar on LinkedIn as well. I'll send that link just right now. And a big thank you to our speakers, Gary Sainer and Ray Voller, for that very insightful presentation. We hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.